Hello there, folks, and welcome to Audity. I'm running a little bit late today. Just one of those nights where I couldn't fall asleep. Unfortunately, I didn't have to be anywhere this morning, so I got to sleep in until noon. But that's not exactly healthy because then the circadian rhythm gets all off balance. And man, oh man, is sleep ever important for functioning. I had the most bizarre dream, but that's a story for another time. I guess the whole point of me even telling you all that was just because I had released a schedule on the Fractal Journal that I'm going to be uploading this on noon on Fridays, Wednesdays, and Mondays. Today I failed to do that, but also I've been stumbling across articles about how important sleep is. Well, stumbling is the wrong word. I looked them up because recently I went to an interview and a person told me I was working since I was 12 years old, and sometimes during the course of my career thus far, because of all the things I was doing, including college and work, I would only get 2 hours of sleep a night. And I thought, buddy, that's kind of cool that you did all that. That's awesome. But, man, 2 hours of sleep I don't think should be promoted, whether or not you became successful. I think that you can definitely become successful without going to those extremes. But hey, we got to have a broad range of ideas thrown out at people. I'm just saying that biology is a thing. 2 hours of sleep a night ain't gonna cut it. We're seeing a lot of goofy behavior and a lot of really muddled, slow as molasses thinking, and I really do believe it has to do with two things, which does not have anything to do with education or anything economic. It really, well, it does have something to do with something economic because you might sleep less well if you're poor. Or if you're rich and you're constantly worried about becoming poor. But anyway, what I'm saying is sleep and exercise so paramount to absolutely everything you do. Health, wealth, blah blah, Benjamin Franklin sayings, the like, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. Today, I was planning to talk about water. In fact, all of yesterday, for a good portion of it anyway, about 2 or 3 hours, I was reading water articles in preparation to talk about it. I'm writing a book, so I'm always reading about water, but I felt that I needed to look up more specialized little articles. And so the articles that I looked up had to do with why should we care about water? Well, I have had experience with people literally asking me, "Hey Alex, why are you working on water? What's up with water, man? You think something's wrong? You want to capitalize on that whole hippie market? You trying to be some kind of activist?" I'm like, no, you need water to live, and water has not always been available. And also, water is right now scarce in a lot of regions due to drought. I believe the article that I read was from around 2014. And in it talks about the California drought and how that's affecting food prices. So if you don't want your food getting more expensive, you might want to pay attention to how we're using water, because a lot of it is frivolous. And, well, what does it matter if we know about it? What can I do about it? That's a really dumb question, because you might not be able to immediately affect any kind of change, but awareness of an issue means that it's in the back of your mind, and you can slowly start to either pressure your law people, which is what you're supposed to do in a democratic republic like the United States, but you are also able to come up with new ideas and know what to pay attention to. There's a lot of news out there, and you need to filter for certain kinds of things. And if you're not getting it, you also need to be pressuring your media people. Hey, guys, why are you talking about Kim Kardashian? Why are you talking about any of this other classic stuff that people throw out as being frivolous? There's also, the other thing is there's pet topics on certain issues. Like in environmentalism, it's generally carbon dioxide, which I'm not going to go into that whole thing because it's not my area of expertise. I'm not researching it. I am a Michael Crichton fan, as you can tell from all of my other videos, and I'm kind of skewed towards his viewpoint on the subject, but I have to revisit it before I give any kind of formal opinion. What I'm going to go ahead and give an opinion on is the fact that it does, even if it is as big of a problem as all of these politicians and people on the left are saying that it is still a distraction from other huge issues that are going on, especially in the way that it's being hyped, which is why we miss so many issues and why things like Flint happen. For instance, here's one thing. In fact, there was a USGS person named Bob Hirsch. In the book, The Ripple Effect by Alex Prodome, it's a long-form journalism read, and he interviews this fellow. Bob Hirsch goes around, travels with him up and down the Chesapeake there, gets his opinions on things. And what he said literally was, we hear a lot about carbon, and it is a problem. We hear about carbon capping, carbon emissions, carbon blah, blah, blah. But the missing greenhouse gas is probably nitrates, nitrification of the water from manure. It's really a huge problem, and here's why. It causes algal blooms to grow out of control, which means that the plant life down at the bottom of the sea there, it can't photosynthesize properly, can't produce oxygen, etc. The sunlight is blocked, the fish die, and creates what's called a dead zone. So it's destroying the fishing industry to such a degree that you can't really get crab in the Chesapeake Bay, which is a 10,000 mile area of water, of coastline, in the northeastern United States. And when, at the end of the chapter that Mr. Alex Prodome was talking about this, when it was time for them all to sit down and eat together, it turned out that the crab that they were eating came all the way from Indonesia. Now, here's another thing. If you're worried about carbon, why do we have to go all the way to Indonesia to get our crab? That requires shipping, which requires fuel and energy and the like. Here's my other thing. This is why sovereignty of nations is absolutely important. It's of environmental importance that people have strong countries with strong economies that are as locally based as possible. Of course, absolute isolationism is not a good idea, but what you want to be able to do is to trade within sane distances and to not have to be necessarily outside of extreme conditions dependent on somebody else. If you're like in a desert area or some kind of extreme region, you're obviously going to have to trade with, other places. But within the United States, we have such a vast, just cornucopia of different landscapes and places that internally we can do much better about trading with each other within the U.S., and that way produce a strong sovereign nation that has an interest in solving its infrastructure problems, its problems with resource management, and keeping everything here so that we're not dependent on expending so much energy to bring stuff back and forth and releasing all kinds of toxins in the air in the process. I'm sure that China would benefit greatly from keeping their money within their country if it was done properly. I'm not an economist, but it just seems to me that given the complexity of issues, doing things on a global scale without necessity complicates them further than they have to be. I'm obviously open to criticism on this, and I have a lot of research to do, but it was kind of a spin-off of the topic of, hey, we're not paying attention to the right things, and we really need to pay attention to water because it has repercussions that are economic, health-related, and industry-related as well. You need to be able to produce things. I suppose you could put industry and economy under the same umbrella, but I think there's a little bit of a difference to be made there, because economy can also mean just what you accrue as capital from just moving around money, which is not necessarily a bad thing because you need to create flow, but industry has more to do with the tangible production of a service. So I'm going to elaborate on what I'm talking about there. God, my sinuses are going absolutely mental today. It's just a trifecta of nonsense this morning. But to elaborate on what I'm talking about here, there's a concept called virtual water, which is the amount of water it takes to produce a certain good. So kind of like your carbon footprint, but it's your water footprint if you're an industry or what have you. And it's actually surprisingly high for the products that we use. So in order to produce a cup of coffee, you use a certain amount of water, blah, 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 which, the argument can be made, and I do kind of think that this is a valid argument that, well, but that water goes back into the system. Yes, it does, but does it go back into the system at the same quality that it was before, and is it staying in the same place? You know? There's also, water gets trapped within a product that's created oftentimes, especially with water bottles. You know, it's taken from one area to another and then contributed to that area. So now you've drawn down an aquifer or a stream bed somewhere just to fill up some water bottles and ship them somewhere else, which can slowly and surely chip away at the integrity of local water systems. The thing of it is when an aquifer or a body of water is drawn down, it makes it more prone to pollution because there's less ability to filter things when there's less water. Yeah, that's the thing about water is it's a mobile thing. It moves around everywhere all the time, and we're contributing to its motion. And the really crazy thing about its motion is that it's not only just flowing through streams and in underground aquifers and through the pores of rocks, but it evaporates. So I forgot what chemical it was exactly. I think it might have been PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, or something to that effect. But those are a legacy pollutant, which means things that we didn't know they were as toxic as they were that we produced centuries ago during the earlier days of the Industrial Revolution. But they evaporated up into the air and got into the bodies of people in the Amazon and were even found in the Antarctic and places like that. So it got incredibly spread out. This one kind of industrial solvent or whatever it is exactly that was used in the United States and maybe England and other such nations spread all around the world just because of the nature of the way that the water cycle works, how prevalent it is, how much of a water plant we are, how much of a water species we are. Now here's why I really was fascinated by this water issue when I discovered it in the book of the biologist E.O. Wilson called Consilience, which had nothing to do with water. It was a philosophical, scientific kind of look at trying to synthesize all artistic and scientific and philosophic insights into a greater body of knowledge. But at the end, I think he was basically just making the case for an appreciation of science and the environment for whatever reason. I don't remember. I read the book a long time ago, but he mentioned water, and it got me thinking, man, that's crazy how much we use. And the thing about water is it permeates everything. It's an access resource. So, I'm a fan of the whole fractal concept. That's what this podcast is named after, iterating iterations. I have the fractal journal going on, and it has an effect on so many different levels, and that's why it's important to study, and no one should ever ask the question, well, why should we care about water? Biogeochemical, I think, is actually a word, an academic word, but also a very good word that shows that complex interrelation, that fractal interrelation of things. Biogeochemical means it has to do with our biology or the biology of the flora and animal kingdom. Geo means it has to do with the geology, so the way that it moves through rock and air and atmosphere and all that jazz. And then chemical has to do with the fact that as it's doing that, chemical reactions are being shifted. So because that term really highlights why it's important, because it affects absolutely the very essence of existence on Earth. I'll link to a lot of reading below that will elaborate this a lot better than I can at this stage, but it is incredibly fascinating how many deep issues we have going on that have kind of been swept under the rug and only surface when tragedy like Flint happens, and even then for a brief flash until we go back to all kinds of weird internecine warfare in our various political factions about minutia. And I know that it's kind of hackneyed to say all these things about partisan bickering, but it's just such a perennial problem, it's impossible not to. I just don't understand how even a lot of alternative people are just stuck in this rut of paying attention to this sensationalistic minutia. Yeah, I could go on and on and on about that, and I think I promised in my other podcast that I was going to interview a musician today, but obviously I overslept, and the fellow himself being a musician, if I try to even get in contact with him, we might not be able to do that, but that is coming up. I'm going to interview some of my hipstery friends that I like to jam with, and there'll be little musical features on here as well as little comedy skits and things. I really want to make this fun as well as informative. That's what I think a good podcast is. Right now, I'm not wearing my contacts, so I can't even see how much time I've spent doing this. I want to shoot for 20 to 30 minute stretches as I'm starting out, but this podcast is kind of open-ended in how long it is. Generally, I will not go over 2 hours just because I have a lot of things to do, and I don't think, especially as I have taken on new responsibilities in the coming week, going to be able to do that. But yeah, I like the long-form things where you can talk things through, and basically you can put me in the background, and if you find me entertaining or informative, stay subscribed to me and listen to me as you're driving to work or washing the dishes or walking the dog or whatever, and glean insights and information, because that is what the podcasting medium is all about. Sure, you can sit there and just watch or listen, etc., but I think that most people benefit the greatest by just having this on in the background, and they catch ideas, and that's what life is all about: communication, one person stimulating another person's mind, and then that whole virtuous cycle. Generally how it's supposed to work when it works right? Oh my goodness. Yes. Now the contact lens thing, y'all have got to be real careful with this, because I've worn them for a number of years now. And I only recently, I knew about it kind of in the back of my head, but I was reading about how bad it is to not have really almost pretty much perfect contact lens habits. It's hard to do. You got to wash those things, rinse each side of them, put them in your little thing. Make sure that little disposable lens case is clean, because that's your eyes, folks, and that can get infected and irritated and cause, I think that largely my sinus problems today are being caused by the fact that I'm wearing an old pair of contacts because I'm overdue for an exam and I don't want to go to it because it's expensive, and then on top of that pay for contacts. But I'm gonna have to do that. Yeah, your eyes affect your mood, trust me. You're not going to be able to perform at peak performance, and you're also going to put yourself at risk for disease if you don't really pay attention to how you're using your contacts. I had a lady friend that was just god awful. I was sitting in the car with her one time. We like to drive places and just hang out and listen to music together. This was a while ago, but her eyes were just getting red and irritated, and I'm like, how long have you been wearing those contacts? And it would have been like she'd been sleeping in them for a week or so. I was like, girl, you cannot do that to yourself. It would hold us up. We'd have to go somewhere, and for 15 minutes she'd be digging in her eye. Yeah, people are strange. People are strange. I'm all about health and vitality, as much as I can be. Sometimes, especially in the past when I was into, and I still am into, a lot of cynical comedians, I was like, yeah, whatever, blah, do this crap, and it's all crap, and it doesn't matter. But in the back of my mind, I've always just been like, but it's also good to try, even if it can seem pointless at times. You can not give a crap with energy and verve, and that's a lot more fun, I think, than having your eyes be all screwed up and you're all congested and tired and blah. No, I just like being fit. I like being healthy. That's why I was stressing at the beginning of this. You got to get your sleep. You can't, no matter how awesome of a salesman you're going to become, or whatever it is that you want to do, you're going to become, 2 hours of sleep at night is just not a good idea to be promoting. And I thought it was funny because during this interview I was talking about synchronicity, and then yesterday I was hanging around with one of my family members, and they're huge fans of Rush Limbaugh. Oh, Lord. The fellow was on, and he was talking about something like some other politician or somebody getting only 2 hours of sleep a night and working since they were 12. Yeah, that's one thing this other fellow also mentioned. And I'm like, I talked to this fellow about synchronicity. This other guy also mentioned about working since he was 12. And I was listening to Max Kaiser earlier today. And Max Kaiser, in one of his recent episodes, talked about synchronicity. And I'm like, that's pretty synchronous. I really do think it's a thing. I have a lot of synchronicity stories. For those of you who aren't familiar with synchronicity, it's basically the idea that it was proposed by Carl Jung about the unconscious and the mandala consciousness and whatnot. Basically, it's when something happens that aligns in such a way that's uncanny and has to do with the unfolding of a greater reality. And so, on that very interesting note, at 20 minutes and 38 seconds, I'm going to leave you and say thank you for listening. If you like what you've been hearing, please subscribe. It will only get better because I will keep trying. Hit that like button if you're on YouTube. And also check out my website, https:// Journal. There's fiction up there, all kinds of stories, all kinds of book teasers, as well as my nonfiction. And I'm going to try to bring people on board so it's not just my voice being broadcast out there. Thank you, everybody, and have a great time wherever time finds you. Goodbye.